Some people have called Solomon the wisest man that ever lived, although you have to think twice about, or three times about that statement when you see some of the things that he did. But he's our subject this evening in the first portion of 1 Kings. We're going to start looking at 1 Kings. We finished 2 Samuel last time. I just wonder if Solomon could get our country out of the mess that it's in. He could probably do as good as anyone. I know he could do as well as anyone that's in office now. That's not criticizing anyone in particular. That's just a general statement there. Hallelujah. I know what I would do if I was there, though. You knew I was going to say that. Yeah, you worried about people taking over the country? It's real simple how to handle things like that. If you're afraid of Russia, just bomb Moscow tomorrow, and you won't be afraid of them anymore. That'll be the end of them there. It's amazing how they sit down at their round tables and have powwows, see who can build the biggest teepee, and just figure out, now, how can we get around this? Just wipe them off the map, and that'll solve that problem in a hurry. And don't think that anyone would ever retaliate once you did something like that. You don't have enough money. We've got not enough money here in the country. See, Solomon could handle all this if he was king. I mean, he could handle things like this. Well, you could quote him a few Bible verses. If a man doesn't work, then don't let him eat. And how many billion of dollars a year would that save? Several $billion per year. And if you don't have the jobs for them, you can always give them a shovel and lead them to a hill and tell them to make a ditch out of that hill. And that's called digging ditches. And about the third blister, they decide that there's easier work to be had than digging ditches. And they found it, except that all they were going to pay was $8 an hour, and they were hoping for something better than that. And so they're waiting. Or another thing you could do is, what about all the sports that we have today? I can hardly believe how duped America is with the sports franchises that are around. When Americans sit back and complain and complain and complain about how bad things are, and there is no human being on this earth that deserves to make $1 million a year. There's no human being that deserves to make $100,000 a year. And you think about it, what do they have to offer to society? Nothing at all. They don't offer society anything except a fun afternoon or a fun evening. They don't contribute anything to society. And yet we pay them. We're the ones that have to pay them. I mean, the government doesn't pay them. We pay them $1 million a year to work out once a week, or once every couple of weeks. And there's some of you here that contribute. Your job, you contribute at least to society. You may dig ditches somewhere, but that keeps the floodwaters out of town, so you contribute to society. They contribute nothing at all. And then once they go on strike to get more money, you know, we were talking about this the other night. This is what I'd do if I was a football fan or a baseball fan. Both of them have just done it. And you see, one person doing this won't do any good, but Americans, they're so duped if they were smart enough, just don't ever go to another football game. And you know what? Those guys would run out of business then. Every one of them, you could run every one of them out of business. Just stop supporting them. But they just pull our strings, getting all of our money from us. And if you're paying too much for your heating bill, let's say that you're heating by something besides electricity, let's everyone just stop using that. They keep hiking the rates up higher and higher. Just everyone stop using it, and they'd go out of business. They'd have to lower the rates, or they'd go out of business. You see how that makes sense? Phone calls too expensive, just don't ever make another phone call, and you know the company's there to help you make your phone calls. And if we could get everyone, this is what I would do if I weren't saved, and I would do like the man did that went to the Washington Monument, but I wouldn't be so stupid to try to get away and get killed then. Go right up next to the thing. Think how many houses the bricks in that thing could have built. 555 feet tall that thing is. And there's no housing for people out there. Well, what in the world they waste their money on something like that for? That's the only way you'll ever get anybody's attention. But the thing about it is, the only people that do things like that today are the mentally deranged people. And that's why if we did it, that's what they think of us. But if we had enough people with just common sense can tell you these things. Gasoline costs too much, just stop driving then. And you'll run those countries out of business over in the Near East there, making all that money on the oil. Too many criminals, cost too much to put them in there. I wasn't going to say execute them. You could execute most of them. They deserve it. The other ones, just dig a big, deep hole in the ground and put machine guns that operate by remote control all around the top of it and just put them down in a hole. I mean a hole the size of several football stadiums. Just let them live down there. Give them some material to build a lean-to, and they can survive. They're not going to die down there, and if they did, the society wouldn't be at a loss. But we build these expensive correctional institutions, and they never get corrected for anything, to house these people in. $20,000 a year to house those fellows. You know what, friends? We are in the last days. It's the days of Noah all over again. Man is so wicked and perverse out there. There's nothing that aggravates me anymore to see the system of government we have, to see these guys get on. You see filmed there in the Congress, and one after another stand up and give his little speech, and he's entitled to give his little speech. And we ought to just, get rid of all those guys. Whoever knows what they're talking about, just get one fellow up there to give his speech, and we'll all do what he says. But they have their round, all, 400 or 500 of them, to stand up there if they want to, and give their little speech, and they just talk and talk and talk. And the more laws you invent, and the more loopholes there are, and the more laws you have to invent again to stop up those loopholes. When you invent those laws, you got more loopholes again. That's why God just started off with 10 laws, 10 words. Because that's all you need. It's about 10. The ones in Exodus 20. By the way, that's still the law of this world. That's supposed to be, the world is still under the law today. And if we would operate, I'm talking about as a country and as a government, if we would operate just on the basis of Exodus 20 and the 10 words, the 10 laws, we don't need all those other laws. Amen. You don't need stop signs up. You don't need speed limits, because you see, the people that break those type of laws are also going to be breaking other types of laws, and pretty soon they break one of those 10. And as soon as they broke one of those 10, we just get rid of them and make an example of them. If there's anyone out here that thinks that's harsh, we're going to cover an example here where Solomon in all his wisdom said, just cut the child in half. Remember that? We're going to get to that. He said, I'll solve your problems. We're not going to debate the thing. We're not going to talk about it. We're not going to argue. We're not going to vote. We're going to do this. We're going to divide the child right down the middle, skull and all, cut him in half. You can have half and you can have half. And he solved the problem there. See, voting and talking and writing bills and getting speeches and everything never does work. I mean, it hasn't worked in 200 years. We've just gotten worse and worse and worse around here. If we just simplify those things and go back to those 10 words, you find adulterers and adulteresses, just amputate them from the waist down, legs and all, everything. And you won't have any more adulterers or adulteresses after that then. They'll just go around, riding around in a little wheelchair or something from then on out. With that would stop the sin. Would stop the cold right there. This is what he does, if you'll turn over to chapter 3. And verse 25, the king said, divide the living child in two, give half to the one, half to the other. That's practical government there. That's practical wisdom. And it's Solomon's wisdom that he's asked for earlier in chapter 3, applied here to the very first case, starting in verse 16, the very first case he gets to see just how wise of a man is he. Now, he doesn't always use the wisdom that he has. That's another thing. But we're clearly told in chapter 3 that God did give the man wisdom. Verse 12, none before thee, none after thee, that'll be as wise as thee. Now, he didn't always use his wisdom like he should have, but he had it nonetheless. He had the wisdom at his disposal, and he had used it. But wisdom used and wisdom had, of course, are as different as daylight and darkness. I don't even see why that form of government should even be thought of as radical, because that's what people want in the long run. I mean, if you get right down to it, they want answers to problems. They want solutions. If you get right down to it, that's what they're looking for. And I bet I could bring solutions. I know I could. And you could too if you were an enlightened king and you knew that you should reward the good and punish the evil. Doesn't matter whether you're a Christian or not, but the good deserve to be rewarded, and their reward is you're getting rid of their evil neighbors that deserve to be gotten rid of. I mean, Hitler was extreme in his view of the blonde-haired, blue-eyed Aryan race, but he had one thought right: let's just eliminate the scum of the earth and we'll get one super race. Now, he went to an extreme there, but he's right as far as getting rid of the unworthies of society. And you think that is wrong? Well, turn back to Genesis. That's what I said. We're in the days of Noah. You just spend a little time reading the newspaper, Genesis 6. You spend a little time watching TV, and look at these people. Look at the movie stars. They contribute nothing to society. And look how much money those people make. Most of them aren't even attractive looking. They just have gotten there by some means or another, and they have some particular personality or trait about them, and they've been able to build and build and build on that for years, and now they're famous people and command no telling how much money per performance. I mean, some of them get like $5,000 just to show up and give a talk about, mental retardation or something. And they pay them $5,000 to show up for something like that. Well, those people should be gotten rid of. That's right. Or start paying them $100 a week and teach them to live like everyone else has to live out there in the world. Genesis 6, verse 5. God saw the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. And it repented the Lord that he had made man on the earth, and it grieved him at his heart. And the Lord said, I will destroy man whom I have created from the face of the earth, both man and beast, the creeping thing, the fowls of the air, for it repenteth me that I have made them. And we're in a much worse predicament than that. Romans 1 said, professing themselves to be wise, they've become utter fools. Men, with their minds in the fields of science, have gotten brighter and brighter all the time. But they don't realize how foolish all their inventions really are. They do nothing for us at all but promote laziness. Do nothing for us at all. And they just don't realize, they think they're so bright and so brilliant because they can invent these various things, but they don't know that the mere invention of those things is working towards this country's destruction. And when it falls, Jesus said that they haven't obeyed the sermon like most people, then great will be the fall of it. Just spend some time looking around and you'll see what I'm talking about. On how wicked and how duped people are. I guess especially Americans. We don't know a lot about the other countries. We don't live there. But we do know about Americans. Just, they complain and complain and complain about what's wrong, but they never will do anything. Now see, as Christians, we're not supposed to do anything. We're supposed to just praise God. Galatians 1:4, that we've been taken out. We've been taken out of this present evil age, delivered from this present evil age. That's what we're supposed to do. But if it were a militant type religion, then we'd have some things that we were supposed to be doing. We'd have to be doing. These people like whatever the fellow's name is, the Ayatollah over in Iran that causes all the problems. Today it's the most easiest thing in the world, as long as you're willing to die for your cause, to assassinate. Any political leader you want to assassinate, walk right up to him and shoot him. Now, you'd probably die too, but that would end this crazy madman over there. And you don't like someone else in some other country, just get rid of them. That's all you have to do. That's real easy. But Americans sit over here and, write their little posters and their little slogans on their windows about the Ayatollah and don't do anything about it. Nothing at all. And then we send someone over there to help them, and the planes crash and the helicopters catch on fire and all of them die, and a mess on our hands. How many people were over there? I don't remember how many over there, 40 people or whatever. Should have bombed Tehran. Just bombed the whole city. That was part of their job, to realize their life might be at stake going over in a foreign embassy like that. So don't let those people come back and complain over here. Should have just bombed the city. You would have killed the Americans there, but you would have killed the Ayatollah and all the other radicals over there. You wouldn't have any more wars. You see, I guess God's got it planned in such a way that it's a bluff. Everyone thinks they're going to bluff everyone else. Now they sit back, like I said, growing a bigger teepee. And we're just sitting there looking over the Atlantic or looking over the Pacific to see who's got the biggest teepee. But no one's going to do anything, you know. I mean, there will come a day when things begin to happen. Today, all is quiet on the Western Front and the Eastern Front and every other front. Just a stalemate there, just a big bluff. Just a big bluff. Well, hallelujah. 1 Kings. We want to start looking at 1 Kings. We've covered some of these things earlier on Samuel. We'll cover them again. Now, the books of Kings, as I said, will be a lot more complex than the books of Samuel. Samuel only covered 2 kings. 1st and 2nd Samuel only covered 2 kings, Saul and David. And Samuel only covered a period of around 125 years in the history of the Jews. Whereas the kings will cover around 40 kings, and it'll extend over a period of around 400 years. So that obviously is going to make 1st and 2nd Kings a little more complex and difficult. There'll be a lot more material to remember because you'll have 40 different kings rather than just 2 different kings plus Samuel there in the beginning of 1 Samuel to keep up with and remember the various things about them. Concerning the name of the book, originally the books of Kings were one book. I'll give you the steps that we looked at earlier in Samuel. It's the same thing. Originally, 1st and 2nd Kings in the Hebrew Bible constituted one book. They were known as Kings. That was the name of the book. Obviously, the name is derived from the great quantity of kings that we find here. One queen, by the way, Athaliah, one queen, but most of them are kings. Then the LXX divided Kings up into 2 books, along with dividing Samuel, of course, up into 2 books. The LXX divides both of them up into 2 books. So we can trace our twofold division of Samuel and Kings, not to an English version or a Hebrew version, but back to the Greek Septuagint, the LXX version. That's where we get our twofold division in Samuel and Kings. Along with the division into 2 books, the LXX renamed the book Kingdoms, which would make our 1st and 2nd Kings the 3rd and 4th kingdoms. That's what they're called in the LXX. 3rd kingdom and 4th kingdoms. Then moving along in history, I guess around 650 years, we come to the Latin Vulgate, Jerome's legacy to the Catholic Church. The Latin Vulgate changed the names of the book back to Kings. So rather than having the 3rd and the 4th kingdoms, then we're going to have the names changed back to Kings. Then finally, in our English versions, we retain the names Samuel and Kings from the Hebrew, but we retain the twofold division from the LXX. We keep the names according to the Hebrew, Samuel and Kings, but rather than having one book, we end up with 4 books. 1st, 2nd Samuel, 1st, 2nd Kings. So on that basis, we've gone back to the LXX to derive the 4-fold division between what originally was 2 books. They deal with the history of 40 kings that go from David to Zedekiah. Now David carries over into the first 2 chapters, but Solomon becomes king right away. David just happens to be mentioned here. But starting with the first verse of 1 Kings and going through the end of 2 Kings, We're going to go through 40 kings, around 40 kings, from David to Zedekiah, which would be the last king. Let's look on our chart here before we go on. The Old Testament kings and prophets. Now, this is one of the most important things for you to keep in mind. The things that you see written here on this chart. Now, you probably won't ever remember all the names of the kings. There are some important ones that'll stick with you. Saul, David, and Solomon, since this is the period of the united monarchy, ought to always stay with you. Along with the division of the kingdom, the fall of the kingdoms, and the last two kings of the two kingdoms, Hoshea in Israel and Zedekiah in Judah, which you can see all of this here on your chart. So we start up at the top, Old Testament kings and prophets. You see Solomon coming to the throne 971. Then all the way down at the bottom left-hand corner of your chart, Zedekiah, last king, Jerusalem, and the temple destroyed in 586. So this is the period. Everything you can see from Solomon through Jeroboam, Rehoboam, Asa, Jehoshaphat, all the way on down through Jehoiakim, Zedekiah, that ends the monarchy. All this is going to be found in the books of 1st and 2nd Kings. Samuel, just restricted up here to the top left-hand part of your chart with Saul and David. This is where you find Samuel restricted up at the top left-hand part. But practically all the rest of the chart are down, as I say, to the fall of Jerusalem and Judah in 586 at the hands of Nebuchadnezzar and the Babylonians, will be found in the books of Kings. So you can see how much material. Besides the kings of Israel and Judah, you also have the kings of Damascus that are important during this time of Israel's history. You've got that on your chart, various ones, Ben-Hadad, Rezin, and some of the other ones. You've also got your kings of Assyria that become particularly important towards the end of the kingdom of Israel. We come down to Tiglath-Pileser III, Shalmaneser V, and Sargon II. That's just about in the middle of your chart, just above Hoshea. Three famous kings that we'll look at later on of Assyria: Tiglath-Pileser, Shalmaneser, Sargon. Sennacherib is important because he invades Judah in 701, but he's not that important as far as Israel is concerned. So that'll at least give you an idea of where all the kings are going here. Now Chronicles, by the way, Chronicles is a little bit different. First Chronicles deals exclusively with David. You've got 9 chapters to begin with of genealogies in First Chronicles, and then from chapter 10, although Saul is mentioned there, on through chapter 29, you've got the history of David. But when you come to Second Chronicles is, for the most part, restricted to the kings of Judah as opposed to the kings of Israel. Therefore, that means if you want to know something about the kings, especially the kings of Israel, don't turn to Samuel or Chronicles, go to Kings, because that's where they'll be found. If you want to know something about Saul or David, the best place to go is 1st and 2nd Samuel rather than Kings or Chronicles, because that's where you're going to have the most of your material given. I'm saying that because a lot of people think of 1st and 2nd Samuel, 1st and 2nd Kings, 1st and 2nd Chronicles saying essentially the same thing. They're really the same thing, and that's entirely a misconception there. And if you're wanting to find a certain king, then you want to know around where to go. You might not know if he's in 1st or 2nd Kings, but if he's of Israel, don't go to 1st Chronicles. That covers David. Or don't go to 1st Samuel. That covers Saul. Or don't go to 2nd Chronicles. That's the kings of Judah. So you want to be able to locate, at least in a general area, where you're going to find whatever the material is that you're looking for. Who's the author of the book? Well, obviously, he had to have used written sources beforehand, because he couldn't have been alive during this whole 400-year period. Obviously, he must have lived at the very end of this period, and he had to have used written documents that existed prior to him that would give him some of the history dating all the way back to the beginning of 1 Kings. But because this period covers 400 years, Don't think of the author being able to live this whole time and therefore being a contemporary of all the events that we see. Now in 1 Kings 11:41, we'll look at some of the various documents that he no doubt could have used. 1 Kings 11:41. The rest of the acts of Solomon. So whoever's writing this is saying, now I've given you some of the acts. The rest of them, I'll tell you where you can find them if you want to find the rest of the acts of Solomon. The rest of the acts of Solomon and all that he did in his wisdom, are they not written in the book of the Acts of Solomon? Now we have a book in the New Testament called the Acts of the Holy Spirit through the disciples. But here in the Old Testament, there was the Acts of Solomon. But we don't have that book. It's not extant. It's not surviving today. It's not with us today. But it evidently was extant during the time of the writer so that he could tell us. Now, if you want to know more about Solomon, then go to the book of the Acts of Solomon. Then over in 14, verse 19, the rest of the acts of Jeroboam, how he warred and how he reigned, behold, they are written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Israel. There's another book that he could have used. Down in verse 29, now the rest of the acts of Rehoboam and all that he did, are they not written in the book of the Chronicles of the Kings of Judah? So you got the Chronicles of Israel and the Chronicles of Judah. Several other books. Then over in 2 Chronicles 9:29, we see other possible sources. 2 Chronicles 9:29. As a matter of fact, we're going to see several here. Now the rest of the acts of Solomon, first and last, are they not written in the book of Nathan the prophet? Now this is different than the book of the Acts of Solomon. And in the prophecy of Ahijah the Shilonite. So there's the third book where we can go and find more information on Solomon. And in the visions of Iddo the seer against Jeroboam the son of Nebat. So there we've got a fourth book just dealing again with Solomon, with this one king. Although it could have dealt with others, he's saying you can find other acts of Solomon if you go to these books. Then in chapter 20, one other passage in verse 34. Now the rest of the acts of Jehoshaphat, first and last, behold, they are written in the book of Jehu, the son of Hanani, who is mentioned in the book of the kings of Israel. So just a whole variety of sources that the inspired writer and the anointed compiler would have had at his use and his disposal in writing this history. That still doesn't really tell us who wrote the book. It just tells us that he probably lived at the end of the period, and he probably used existing written documents that had come before him. Now, of course, the end of the period, if you go over to the last chapter of 2 Kings, brings us to the end of the nation of Judah. I mean, this is the complete and final end of her existence as a separate entity for the next, 70 years. She'll remain in Babylon. So we're going to have to find someone, most likely, that lived during this period, which would put it 586 BC. That rules out just a whole lot of people that lived before and after. It'd have to put it during that time period, and therefore someone who lived around 600 BC before they could have written the book. It ends, as a matter of fact, with Nebuchadnezzar taking the city. Well, we have to go back to chapter 24. I want to read a verse here. Chapter 24, verse 18, all the way through the end of chapter 25, we see this duplicated word for word in another book of the Bible. Zedekiah was 21 years old when he began to reign, and he reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, and his mother's name was Hamutal, the daughter of Jeremiah of Libnah. And he did that which was evil in the sight of the Lord, according to all that Jehoiakim had done. And through the anger of the Lord it came to pass in Jerusalem and Judah, until he had cast them out from his presence, that Zedekiah rebelled against the king of Babylon. It came to pass in the 9th year of his reign, in the 10th month, and the 10th day of the month, that Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, came, he and all his host, against Jerusalem, and pitched against it, and they built forts against it round about. And the city was besieged unto the 11th year of King Zedekiah. And on the 9th day of the 4th month the famine prevailed in the city, and there was no bread for the people of the land. And the city was broken up, and all the men of war fled by night by the way of the gate between two walls, which is by the king's garden. Now the Chaldees were against the city round about, and the king went the way toward the plain. It goes on to tell us that the Chaldeans caught up with Zedekiah, and of course killed his sons before his eyes, fulfilling one prophecy that Jeremiah the prophet had given, and then putting out his eyes so that he wouldn't see the land into which he came, fulfilling another prophecy that also had been prophesied about him. Now, what's interesting about Kings that's entirely different when you compare it to Chronicles is that it is written from a prophet's point of view, whereas Chronicles is written from a priestly point of view. Now, this can be seen in Kings by the fact that the author is continually reminding us of all the sins that Israel and Judah has committed, just like, see, this is just what a prophet would do. He would build up to the final conclusion by proving that God was just in his punishment of this particular people because of these multiplied sins they had committed over these 4 centuries that they've been in existence.
For the continuation of this message, please turn the tape over.
He would build up to the final conclusion by proving that God was just in his punishment of this particular people because of these multiplied sins they had committed over these 4 centuries that they've been in existence. Therefore, this is something not that a priest would do. Chronicles has a lot of emphasis on the priesthood and the temple and the sanctuary and these things, which gives us the hint and the inclination that it was perhaps written by a priest, since it has a priestly point of view behind it. Kings is different. Kings has a prophetic point of view behind it, which must mean it was written by some prophet. Now, according to the best guess on just what I've said so far, and according to Jewish tradition, Jeremiah is the author of the book of 1 Kings and 2 Kings. Now, if you'll remember what we just read and turn over to the last chapter of his prophecy, you'll see there verbatim, word for word, Jeremiah 52. That's why I began with 2 Kings 24:18, because this is where he began. If you want to hold your hand there, you can see how they go along. 2 Kings 24:18, Zedekiah was 21 years old, began to reign, and reigned 11 years, so forth. Jeremiah 52:1, Zedekiah was 21 years old when he began to reign. He reigned 11 years in Jerusalem, and so forth. And it goes right on to the last verse of his book. This is speaking of Jehoiakim, who had been kept captive in Babylon. And for his diet there was a continual diet given him of the king of Babylon, every day a portion until the day of his death, all the days of his life. That's the last, am I going too fast? That's the last verse. Jeremiah 52:34. For his diet there was a continual diet given him of the king of Babylon, every day a portion until the day of his death, all the days of his life. Go back to the last verse. In 2 Kings, his allowance was a continual allowance given him by the king, a daily rate for every day, all the days of his life. Just exactly the same. Now, there is one argument that Jeremiah couldn't have written chapter 52 here of his book, along with the portion there in 2 Kings, because he at this time, remember, had been taken down to Egypt. Now, he didn't want to go, but the people fled, and they took him with them. But it's really no argument because we were not told, but he could have come back, or he could have found out that particular information from someone else, even though he might not have actually been there. What we're told, in other words, is that these chapters or these books here appear to have been written from the point of view of someone living in Babylon, whereas Jeremiah at the time was living in Egypt. And he would be writing and representing things from a different point of view. But he, as the prophet of God, was in the Spirit wherever God's people were, and therefore, just like Ezekiel could write as though he were in Jerusalem because he was taken back in the Spirit there, Jeremiah can do something similar in writing the last chapter of 2 Kings and the last chapter of his prophecy. Purpose of the book of both kings together. So we're going to leave it with Jewish tradition and a good guess that Jeremiah was the author. Remember, he's the one in his 52-chapter prophecy always rebuking the people for their sins. And so there would have been no one better to come right along and write 1st and 2nd Kings, tracing the history of the people's sin. Always saying, the sin of Jeroboam, the son of Nebat, that made the people sin. That phrase occurs time and time and time again, always reminding the people, you sinned, and that's why you're getting what you're getting. So this would make a lot of sense that Jeremiah would have written it. Purpose of both books is to give a history of Israel and Judah from the end of David's reign to the Babylonian captivity. From the end of David's reign to the Babylonian captivity. We're going to make scholars out of all of you yet here. Hallelujah. I know it's tedious, all that we do, but praise the Lord, it's a blessing. Then 1 Kings, we'll break it down, 1st and 2nd. 1 Kings to give us a history from the end of David's reign to the reign of Ahaziah in Israel and Jehoshaphat in Judah. 1 Kings, from the end of David's reign, that's 1 Kings 1 and 2, from the end of David's reign to the reign of Ahaziah of Israel and Jehoshaphat of Judah. Yeah, you see, Ahaziah, I thought he was the one. He's the king here that dies in 2 Kings 1. So we're going right down to the end of his reign. He's the one that asked his messengers to go and inquire of the god Beelzebub of Ekron. Then 2 Kings, the purpose is to give us a history from Ahaziah and Jehoshaphat until the time of Zedekiah and the captivity. Ahaziah and Jehoshaphat to the time of Zedekiah and the captivity. Zedekiah was the last of Judah's kings, and Hoshea was the last of Israel's kings. Israel had a 9-dynasty history, and of course, Judah only had a 1 dynasty, that being the Davidic dynasty. We'll say more about that, the dynasties, next time when we look at the division of the kingdom. Now, let me ask you a question. Historically speaking, what is the most important event in the book of 1 Kings? Does anyone know? What? No, historically speaking, there's something more important than that. Because you see, Israel's whole history is based on this. The temple doesn't affect it, one way or the other. Yes. The division of the kingdom, that's in chapter 11. Historically speaking, that's the most important chapter in the book, and that's the most important event in the book, the division of the kingdom. Because that's what's going to wreak havoc later on in her history. Okay, then what are the two most important events, historically speaking, in 2 Kings? It ought to follow, obviously. The fall of Israel, the fall of Judah. The fall of Israel is in 2 Kings 17, and the fall of Judah in 2 Kings 25. So that would only follow. 2 Kings 17, the fall of Israel. 2 Kings 25, the fall of Judah. The two most important events. Let me give you a quick outline, and then we'll get into however many chapters we can do here on Solomon. An outline of these two books is very easy, threefold division here. Now, I just give these outlines myself. You can find your own, or there are 100 different ways you can divide the books up. But this is the way we'll divide them. 1 Kings 1 through 11 is the reign of Solomon. 1 Kings 12 through 2 Kings 17 is the history of the division of the kingdom to the fall of Israel. That's the material found from the division of the kingdom to the fall of Israel. 1 Kings 12 through 2 Kings 17. Then 2 Kings 18 through 25, we have from the fall of Israel to the fall of Judah. Occupies the second half of the book of 2 Kings, from the fall of Israel to the fall of Judah, chapter 18 through chapter 25. So in these first 11 chapters of 1 Kings, which is what we want to look at this evening, we have the reign of Solomon. In chapters 1 and 2, we see Solomon being anointed king. So let's look at several things here in these first two chapters. 1 Kings 1 and 2, we have Solomon being anointed king here. An interesting, howbeit a little confusing, account and story of how he was anointed and why the urgency and the necessity in his anointing. Beginning with the first verse. Are you all up? First verse. Now King David was old and stricken in years. He's 70 years old at this time. One of the oldest of the kings as far as any age on record here that we know. We know, of course, from 2 Samuel earlier that he became king when he was 30 and remained king for 40 years and died after he gave up the throne to Solomon, which would make him 70 years old whenever he died. King David was old and stricken in years, and they covered him with clothes, but he got no heat. So he was going downhill physically. Don't base your divine healing on David. Wherefore his servant said unto him, Let there be salt, or you'll end up with a maiden beside you. Let there be salt for my lord the king, a young virgin. And let her stand before the king, and let her cherish him, and let her lie in thy bosom, that my lord the king may get heat. So they sought for a fair damsel throughout all the coast of Israel, kind of like they were looking for a new queen there after Vashti, the queen of Ahasuerus. In the book of Esther, didn't want to dance in any provocative way in front of all the lords of Ahasuerus. They had to search for a new queen and found Esther. Well, they're seeking for a fair damsel throughout all the coast of Israel. They found Abishag, a Shunammite, and brought her to the king. And the damsel was very fair, and cherished the king, and ministered to him, but the king knew her not. Now that's not 4 verses just to fill up space where it mentions Abishag, because Abishag is going to result in someone's death here later on in the book, as we'll see. So they're going to introduce her and her relationship to David here at the very beginning. Now, notice there's no conjugal relationship going on. It's simply one of necessity in order to keep the king warm, now that he's 70 years old. Verse 5, then Adonijah. Adonijah is David's 4th-born son. We'll look at that in a moment. The first 3 already have died. Adonijah is the 4th-born, which makes him heir apparent to the throne. Then Adonijah, the son of Haggith, exalted himself, saying, I will be king. And he prepared him chariots and horsemen and 50 men to run before him. Now, this is, remember, this is what Absalom did. The first thing he did was to prepare himself horses and 50 men to run before him. That was simply a way in Israel at that time of saying that I am ascending to the throne now. Whenever you'd gather together 50 men and horses and so forth before you, then that was the same as pronouncing yourself as king, because Absalom had done the exact same thing before this. Now we have to go back to, 2 Samuel 3. Where we have the list of the children born to David while he's in Hebron. And then over in chapter 5 of 2 Samuel, we find the list of those that are born to him while he's in Jerusalem. Now, beginning with verse 2 of 2 Samuel 3. Unto David were sons born in Hebron. His firstborn was Amnon of Ahinoam the Jezreelite. Now, what happened to Amnon? Why is he not trying to be king now? What happened to Amnon? He did what? Okay, he seduced Tamar, and then what happened as a result of that? Who was Tamar's brother? Absalom. And Absalom killed Amnon. So Amnon, son number one, gone. And his second, Chileab of Abigail. Remember Abigail back in, I think that was chapter 25, where we were introduced to Abigail, the wife of old Nabal, the Carmelite. Now, Chileab, we're not told anything about him, so we just assume he probably died when he was still a child, or at least a young teenager, because we never see him appear. He doesn't do anything like these other first sons of David does. So he is now dead. And the third, Absalom, the son of Maacah, the daughter of Talmai, king of Geshur. So Absalom, of course, is a half foreigner here. He's not really a true Israelite because he's got other blood mixed in with him. What happens to Absalom? Joab throws 3 darts in his heart whenever he's caught in the tree after the mule went out from underneath him. So that means Absalom can't become king, although he had tried. Look in verse 4, and the fourth, Adonijah. So in other words, he's the oldest living son now, which means that he will obviously think it's time for him to be king. And this is exactly what he attempts to do back in 1 Kings 1. Now we have to go over to 2 Samuel 5 and verse 14 to find the names of those that were born unto him in Jerusalem. Now we've already seen 6 so far in chapter 3. So the 7th one is Shemua, the 8th one, Shobab, the 9th one, Nathan, and Solomon is the 10th born son of David. That marks him way down the line here, 2 Samuel 5:14. He's way down the line as far as any hereditary monarchy, that is, the monarchy being passed on to the oldest, the firstborn, or whoever is the oldest living one, because Solomon is all the way down there, the 10th born son. Now, who is Solomon's mother? Bathsheba. Solomon was Bathsheba's second child born to David. The first one died, remember, in chapter 12. So Solomon is the second-born son. The first one had died as means of judgment, and God allowed the second one to live, and he becomes great. He becomes the great one of all of David's sons. All right, back to 1 Kings 1. So we've got the first 3 sons are dead. The fourth-born, Adonijah, obviously thinks, and rightfully thinks, that the throne should belong to him. But we've got Solomon coming on the scene here in chapter 1, because evidently David, at an earlier time, which is not recorded anywhere in the Bible, has made a vow to Nathan and to Bathsheba, Nathan the prophet and Bathsheba, Solomon's mother, that when David dies, Solomon will be the next king. Now we're told that here in Kings, where David said that I'll do according to the vow that I vowed unto you before, but we're not recorded. That vow's not recorded anywhere. So it was made earlier to Bathsheba by David that whenever he died, then Solomon would come to the throne. Now, Nathan does just like Joab did on several occasions. In verse 11 of this chapter, rather than boldly going in himself to the king, he contrives a plot to get Bathsheba to go in on behalf of her son, and therefore hopefully David would be more willing to listen to Bathsheba than to Nathan in letting people know that Solomon was to be the king. Wherefore Nathan spake unto Bathsheba, the mother of Solomon, saying, Hast thou not heard that Adonijah the son of Haggith doth reign, and David our Lord knoweth it not? Now therefore come, let me, I pray thee, give thee counsel, that thou mayest save thine own life and the life of thy son Solomon. Go and get thee in unto King David, and say unto him, Didst not thou, my lord, O king, swear unto thine handmaid, saying? So she's reminding him of an oath, you see, but we're not given the oath earlier. Assuredly Solomon thy son shall reign after me, and he shall sit upon my throne. Why then doth Adonijah reign? Behold, while thou yet talkest there with the king, I also will come in after thee and confirm thy words, which he does in verse 22. And lo, while she yet talked with the king, then Nathan the prophet also came in. In other words, Nathan wants to make it look like, it's really a little deceptive here, that he's got some divine unction and revelation to come in and let David know. And since Bathsheba's already telling him, it'll be very appealing to David. He thinks, well, you know, 2 witnesses here, 2 confirmations that I need to go ahead and set Solomon up as the ruler. So this is what goes on in the next part of the chapter. We're still here in 1 Kings 1. We've got Solomon being anointed king, verse 46, and also Solomon sitteth on the throne of the kingdom. Now right away, in verse 50, Adonijah becomes fearful. We're in 1 Kings 1:50. Adonijah becomes fearful, and he flees into where he can grab a hold of the horns of the altar, the 4 protrusions that came from the altar. Now that was supposed to be symbolic of a place of peace where no one could kill you. Now that wasn't a law, it was just generally accepted. That if you could get in there and get a hold of the horns of the altar, then that was the same as saying that God's protection was on you. And at this time, Solomon tells him in verse 52, well, if you show yourself a worthy man, then I'll let you live. Now remember, this is his older brother here, Adonijah is his older brother, and he's going to allow him to live. In chapter 2, still looking at Solomon's anointing as king, we have David actually dying here and giving his final charge. Let's see, in these first 9 verses, David is giving his charge to Solomon. It's a little retributive against some of his past associates, namely Joab in verse 5 and Shimei in verse 8. David said, don't let any of them come down to the grave in peace. David sometimes, he sometimes did seek revenge, sometimes he didn't. We can explain that easily, though, when we look at some of the imprecatory Psalms. Some people stumble over the fact that David is supposed to be the man after God's own heart, but then in the Psalms he's saying, Lord, slay my enemies and don't let any of them live. Well, there's a reason why he says that, and a reason why, this is getting off in another area. It's not contradicting the sermon, but in a way, a Christian can think the same thing and say the same thing. I remember Paul curses a fellow in Acts 13. And he wrote Romans 9, the end of Romans 9, which is a duplication of the Sermon on the Mount, do evil to no man. But he cursed elements and sorcery in Acts 13. So there is a time whenever you can express some of the indignation that God Almighty himself is feeling, and he's going to use an instrument to express it through. One explanation of why David does what he does. Okay, then later in chapter 2, we have Adonijah coming to Bathsheba, again wanting Bathsheba to be the go-between. This is down in verses 16 and 17. And he asked Bathsheba to go into Solomon and ask Solomon if he will give to him, to Adonijah, Abishag. Now we have seen this happen once before over in 2 Samuel. What is wrong with him doing that? What does that mean? Okay? If you get any of the king's concubines, then you become king. Remember, that had happened earlier. That's what Ishbosheth had charged Abner of doing, I think over in 2 Samuel 3. I don't remember the chapter, but earlier in 2 Samuel. Ishbosheth had said the very same thing to Abner, you've taken one of Saul's, my father's concubines. And it just infuriated Abner, and as a result, he switched his allegiance from Ishbosheth in Israel down to David in Judah, you see. So this is the same account, this is the same principle happening all over again. You don't ask for one of the king's concubines or one of his maids, because that's the same as saying that you're claiming the throne. And look down to verse 22. Solomon is rather sarcastic. He said, well then, why dost thou ask Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? Ask for him the kingdom also. In other words, that's what he's asking for, so you might as well just say it. But Bathsheba didn't know all the politics and everything. Solomon was a little more advised in areas like that. And he said, you might as well come right out and ask for the kingdom, because I know what he's doing. And so as a result, he is put to death. End of verse 24, Adonijah shall be put to death this day. Verse 25, Solomon sent by the hand of Benaiah, the son of Jehoiada, and he fell upon him that he died. And he had said earlier, if you show yourself a worthy man, I'll let you live. But he showed himself unworthy here. Verse 27, Solomon thrust out Abiathar from being priest unto the Lord, that he might fulfill the word of the Lord which he spake concerning the house of Eli in Shiloh. What was that word? We mentioned that earlier. What was that word? Okay, remember Eli was a descendant from Ithamar, and Abiathar was also a descendant from Ithamar, who was the fourth-born son of Aaron. Eleazar was the third-born son. Nadab and Abihu had died in Leviticus 10 when they offered strange fire, which made Eleazar the high priest, and the line should be passed down through his oldest son. He was the oldest living son of Aaron. Now, for some unexplained reason, remember it got switched from Eleazar to the line of Ithamar. And when we open up the book of 1 Samuel, who is priest? Eli, a direct descendant from Ithamar. And as a result of him not controlling his sons, allowing them to lie with the women at the door and steal meat that didn't belong to them from the sacrifices, then God said, there's coming a day that I'll change the priesthood back to where it should be. And we've got the fulfillment in 1 Kings 2:27. So just one verse stuck in here, but it's a fulfillment of the prophecies back in 1 Samuel chapters 2 and 3, where God said that he would change the priesthood. And of course it goes to Zadok. Zadok will become the high priest. Now during the reign of David, Abiathar and Zadok had both been priests. It's an unusual thing that we had there. Both of them had been the high priest, which you're not supposed to have two. But Abiathar had been high priest under Saul, and when David came on the scene, he wanted to make Zadok the high priest. And rather than cause a lot of commotion, he allowed just both of them to be the high priest. Abiathar, who remember was the only living descendant from Ahimelech, whom Doeg was responsible for his death, along with the 70 or 80 other priests there at the city of Nob, whenever King Saul had gone there. I assume you remember this back from 2 Samuel. But Abiathar was the only one who escaped and went to David. And as a result, he allowed him to go ahead and continue as high priest. Then in chapter 3, Shimei is mentioned later on in this chapter here. He was the one that had cursed King David. In chapter 3, we have Solomon asking for wisdom. He asked for wisdom. As we mentioned those verses already, he received it. The second half of the chapter gives us his first demonstration of that wisdom concerning the two harlots that both had children born to them around the same age. Then chapters 4 through 10 give us the greatness of Solomon, known as the Golden Age of Israel. This was her most prosperous time. During David's time, David is still having to fight a lot of battles. Solomon doesn't fight that many battles. As a matter of fact, he only fights one offensive battle that I remember. Only one time does he go on the offensive and have to fight, because he already has everything that he needs. Chapter 4 talks about his greatness, the food that he has. Verse 26 should read his 4 rather than 40,000 stalls for horses. And it goes on to mention he was a botanist and a writer, composer of songs and proverbs and so forth. Now in chapters 5 through 8, a lot of material that we can't look at there. We, of course, have the building of the temple. An important event, of course, during this time. Chapters 5 through 8, the building of the temple. Solomon had the help of Hiram, who was king in Tyre, and some of his Phoenician workmen. And the temple was built after a Phoenician and not an Israelite pattern. It was definitely built after a Phoenician pattern, because they are the ones who did most of the work on the temple. The Phoenicians that Solomon was able to hire from his northern friends. Then chapters 9 and 10 give us some more of his greatness, with chapter 10 being the familiar story of the visit of the Queen of Sheba, which is a country in about the same place as Yemen is today, southern Arabia, the Arabian Peninsula. Chapter 11, which we'll end with here, is Solomon's great downfall, which is going to result in the division of the kingdom. And we're not going to look at any verses here because we'll look at that next time. We'll talk about the division of the kingdom next time. But we're told Solomon loved many strange women. Now, it doesn't mean, weird women. It just meant people that weren't Israelites. I guess that made them strange. But, it goes on to mention Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Zidonians, Hittites, in chapter 3 and verse 1 even includes the Egyptians. So we just like too many different women from too many different nations. A little too cosmopolitan to suit God's purpose for him. But don't think that it's just because he did this that resulted in his fall, because remember in chapter 3 and verse 1, chapter 3 is where he asked for wisdom. And before that, he was a fairly wise individual. He knew how to handle David's enemies that were still alive. But in chapter 3 and verse 1, it says that he makes affinity with Pharaoh and marries Pharaoh's daughter. So he's already doing things that he shouldn't be doing. And all through here, he's doing things that he shouldn't be doing. He had wisdom, but he didn't always know how to apply it. Hallelujah. Questions? Deuteronomy 17. That's another thing. Solomon introduced chariotry into Israel. See, David and Saul hadn't had that, but Solomon introduced chariots. He got those from Egypt whenever he married Pharaoh's daughter in 1 Kings 3 and verse 1. And Deuteronomy 17, it said, don't multiply wives, don't multiply horses, don't multiply chariots. But be sure you keep a copy of this book of the law and read it day and night. And how can you get 1,000 wives? That will keep you busy. Yes. Well, you see, Hiram didn't want those cities. They weren't any good. So he gave them back to Solomon. Right. You see, Solomon had been paying him grain all along for his help on building the temple. But evidently the grain wasn't enough, so Solomon gave him 20 Galilean cities, but they weren't any good. And so he recognized when he came down to visit them, they weren't any good, so he gave it back to Solomon. Solomon had to give him something else.
For a